Welcome to the 3 layers of WordPress maintenance for the meetup tonight. I can give you an overview of blocks, but I think we're going to save that for a speaker that is much more savvy on those for another time. But thank you for the introduction and the chance to chat with everyone once again about WordPress maintenance. This is a topic that if you've been around WordPress websites, you know that they do require a bit of upkeep, and doing that either more hands-on or offshoring that to a team or a service that can do that for you is going to bring a lot of benefit in the peace of mind, in the ongoing performance, and just smooth operation of your website. So what we're going to do tonight, we're going to go over some of the principles of keeping up a WordPress website and some of the tools and services and practices around good website upkeep. And I'll be happy to answer some unique questions if you have any as you think on your experiences supporting clients, building websites, testing, and experiencing different things as you maintain a property. So, to tell you briefly about myself, as Steve mentioned, I've been an active WordPress community member for a little while. I've participated as a volunteer at WordCamp NYC and others around the country for several years. I'm an aspiring independent developer. Like many of us, I've taught myself a lot of the best practices around WordPress, how to create child themes, how to reverse engineer, setting up a good WordPress instance, and how to work with plugins and customization. So I'm very glad to kind of be on my way onto professional services, and that is the company that I work for as my primary employment is RT Kemp, who is one of the WordPress consultancies that works on big websites. So I get to work with independent, small-scale projects as an individual, and I get to work on big websites and bring that knowledge to us together. I'm happy to connect with everyone. You can visit mervinhernandez.com. You can follow me on Twitter, on LinkedIn. I do a lot more observing of social media than I do posting, so just keep that in mind, and I'm always happy to chat and connect with folks. So on to the chat. Just a quick disclosure, these are all my opinions and experiences with all of the services and tools that I'm going to mention today. There are no affiliate links on my presentation at all. I encourage you to go do research, follow, talk to all of these brands as members of the WordPress community. They're all fantastic and great people to work with, so they'll be more than glad to answer your questions and explain their services to you, but just a quick disclosure there. All right, let's get acquainted with why site maintenance is important. Well, what's the worst that can happen, Mervin? If you have tinkered with setting up WordPress all on your own, trying to provision a new instance on a server or a sandbox up in the cloud, it's very likely that you may have encountered a screen like this. Up on the screen right now is just a browser window with a URL up at the top and a blank, completely blank screen, the white screen of death, we call this in WordPress. This is just one of the worst case scenarios that can happen on
Mervin, you're not sharing your screen.
Uh-oh. Thank you. Okay, how about now?
Yep, we see it now. All good.
All right. Thanks. So here's my slide with my Twitter and LinkedIn handle. Happy to connect with anyone there. I'll put this up at the end as well, so just get us going here. The disclosures completed that. And why is site maintenance important? And here's that demo of the white screen of death. So we just have example.com up at the top and then a completely white screen. So if you've tried to provision a website, you might not have configured the WP config file correctly. You might have missed associating a directory with your WordPress instance. There are a number of reasons why this can happen, but among them is in the regular operation of your website, something can go wrong and your website could potentially white screen. This is one of the worst case scenarios. It's very common, and especially as you're learning and getting familiar with WordPress, you might see this, not just in operations. But what's the worst that can happen? Well, the white screen of death is one of them. You could have critical error messages from WordPress. There could be breaking issues that impact your site loading, either from the server level, inside of the WordPress instance, any kind of external services that are required for your website to load, like Hotjar or analytics that may be running. You could have front-end theme breaks that you make an update or you make a change to your theme with a new version, and now something significant breaks, not just the look, but you just can't access your website. There's malware, there's user access, lockouts, and hacks that can legitimately happen. You can lose control of your own WordPress website. There are catastrophic failures that happen at the server level, very uncommon, and there may be redundancies that your hosting company may put in place, but nevertheless, you're still ultimately responsible for the uptime of your solution. So any and all of these can have a significant negative effect on your website. So having a few things ready to go in the cases when you have visitor impacting issues is a good practice. And something that I'm going to incorporate into the talk across the board tonight is proportions. So let's say if you're managing an e-commerce website for yourself or for your clients, and they have a fair amount of money going through it every month or every quarter, well, you want to throw some money at maintaining that, optimizing it, testing the features and the cart functionality so that you make sure that there are no lost revenues. Likewise, if you have a small portfolio website that isn't moving very much, you don't have a lot of content that's being uploaded to it on a regular basis, then backing that up once a week should suffice as a proportion. So I wanted to introduce that concept to us tonight, because the 3 layers that I'm going to introduce to you, you can do as much or as little as you want in these good practices of website maintenance, but if you have some money going through it, if it's a really important website and pieces of information that have to be available, then pouring more resources and doing these practices in a more methodical and systematic way is a good proportion to keep in mind. So what's the cost of these issues happening? Well, as I just mentioned, it could cost you time, it could cost you lost sales, it could cost you bad experiences with your customers. Let's think, for example, even a small business restaurant. If you have a website and your website is just pointing you to Grubhub, or it's at least giving you the address and the hours for a small business restaurant, it makes an impression. Hey, I found you on Google. I can't even go to your website to find your phone number or to find the address or what have you. And it makes an impression. So negative experiences for visitors should be pretty high up there. You want to do everything you can so your website is snappy, it works, it's up and available, and especially if you have e-commerce, that it's running smoothly, you can execute a transaction quickly and efficiently. And time. If you have any of these issues happen to you, if you have a white screen of death, if you have a plugin update that breaks your site, and you don't have a backup, and then you have to try to reverse all of those changes, it's going to cost you time to recover all of that. One of the other times I gave this talk, I had worked with a small-scale client who was working on populating their e-commerce website. Very small, just a small amount of products and items and images, but nevertheless, hey, he didn't secure his site after I gave him access to it. We weren't deployed yet. Well, there we lost an amount of time to recover and start from scratch. because we didn't have backups running yet. So it just stands to reason, no matter the size, there's ways to do this at a scale that makes sense for the project, and it'll save you time, it'll save you money, it'll save you heartache and your reputation. So avoiding the woulda, coulda, shouldas is really easy to do. Once you listen to this talk, I'm going to show you a bunch of tools. Don't get caught up in a situation where something breaks your site and you're not prepared. So let's get you some good foundations and good practices on how to avoid all of that stuff. So let's call this layer 1. I'm gonna show you the layers slide in a little bit, but as I mentioned, across the board, these are good practices. You can go either at a high level altitude of implementing these things, or you can go really deep and incorporate them with more and more systematic and deeper approaches. So let's talk about a good solid foundation for a good WordPress website. So it does hinge a good bit on good hosting. So there are now, gosh, I don't know, probably 10 or 20 really good community member hosting companies that are doing a fantastic job of managed WordPress hosting, and one of them are our meetup sponsors, Kinsta. Among them, they're creating tools for developers. They're optimizing the solutions to deliver WordPress and in good amounts of scale. So good hosting that is familiar and optimized for WordPress is a great basis for building a good property. PHP version, very closely tied to your hosting company. There's not all of the hosting companies update and test with this or make it available for everyone. So good web standards, PHP versions among them, light speed. There's a couple of server-side things that can really help your website perform better, and caching that is available with certain hosts. So good web standards, a good hosting company that knows WordPress is, let's call that fertile soil. You're in good footing. You don't have to worry about uptime as much, and they often take care of a lot of the real sysadmin stuff. So keeping PHP up to date and doing some of the server maintenance is a real good part to just not worry about. Supported and documented plugins and lightweight themes. This is really easy to do nowadays. You can go look up reviews. You can go look up documentation and assess how often these themes and plugins are being updated and kept up to standards for WordPress. If you see a plugin or a theme that hasn't been updated in a year or two, heaven forbid, you probably would be best served to look for an alternative that includes the features and brings the functionality that you need, that is more current, that has been recently updated, that has been tested with nearly or very close to the latest versions of WordPress. Documentation and support is another great way to see what plugins are being actively worked on, kept up to date on compliance with WordPress and web standards. So lightweight and well-supported themes are another good way to build your solution strong with stuff that's current, that doesn't have any glaring security gaps or performance impacting things. Access and user roles permissions. Now we're starting to get a little bit in the advanced category, but just giving access to the people that are familiar with the certain parts of your website is a good security practice and a good way to keep areas of your website away from folks that shouldn't be installing themes, for example. So reinforcing good user practices is another way to make sure your site doesn't get impacted negatively by somebody who didn't know, oh, I thought I could just change this line of code because there's the theme editor available to them, which is where you can edit the code right from the WordPress instance. So user access controls, permissions, capabilities. If you have some developer savviness, you can find lots of documentation on how to add, control these different areas of WordPress. And there are plugins too. There's members available for you to only create, let's say, for example, a store manager user role that comes with WooCommerce. Okay, you can only go touch products. You can only go touch orders. You can't touch pages and posts. So implementing things of that nature will help you keep an eye on what's happening on your WordPress website and who can touch what. Staging and production workflows. We're coming into the developer category of good practices, but if you have the ability to clone or to stage your website on your hosting company, this is another way to make sure you don't implement breaking changes on your production website. It was not very long ago that one of the major versions of Elementor had some pretty significant changes in it, and they were indeed breaking changes. So if you don't have the ability to test or to keep up to date with the change logs and view that there are breaking changes coming to a new version of a plugin, you could do yourself some harm by pushing it into production and then having to roll back and deal with the newly written shortcodes that you have to take back in order to recover your website. So another great practice is listening to good advice from trusted sources. The WordPress Codex is kind of the baseline. There's lots of documentation on how to maintain WordPress there, but good blogs. There's WP Engines. Kinsta is putting out great material on how to develop good processes, optimization, SEO. Yoast SEO puts out great articles on SEO, of course, but in general, good WordPress and content practices. So listening to good sources of counsel and what to do with content, with users, with security, all of those come together to giving you a good foundation for your solution. And as I mentioned just a moment ago, in proportion. If you have a big website that you're maintaining, it's got 5 different editors and authors pouring into this solution. You have ads or you have money and traffic coming through your website. Do invest in good support and good maintenance and good testing practices because you need that solution to be up and running. If you have a small portfolio website, then I'm going to show you free and very low-cost alternatives that will bring you that peace of mind that if something happens to your small portfolio website, you don't have to start from scratch if something happens, and you just save yourself some trouble if you do an update that breaks something in production because that's the one environment you've got. So all within the proportions of your solution. So here we go. Let's break down these areas in a bit more detail. I'm going to show you examples of the tools that you can use for the various pieces of maintenance. And let's go at the highest level. So let's say you want to maintain one or many websites, and you have some clients or you have some websites that require more hands-onness than others. Well, here's where I'd like to introduce some of our great community members that offer this range of services, because WordPress maintenance can be complicated if you have a big solution. But if you want to offload this, let's shout out to GoWP and WP Buffs. They're both great services that, in large part, they are do-it-for-you kind of solutions. You subscribe to a plan with either of them, and they will do the plugin updates. They will do the WordPress core testing and keeping your site up to date. They will do some performance tweaks. I think they offer WP Rocket and Imagify or Smush. So you then have available to you. You can use their licenses to optimize your images, to optimize your website. We've got some echo. You have unmute your mics if you're not answering questions just yet, please. Thank you very much. So those are examples of do-it-for-you type of services. GoWP, WP Buffs, both fantastic services. They're great members of the community. Go check them out. On the other side of the spectrum, there's tools that help you do the management yourself and test and perform updates on your terms and on your priority. And those would be in the category of WP Sync and Manage WP. I personally love Manage WP because some of the websites that I help support and maintain do require more hands-onness, and that's my development work that goes into those websites. So Manage WP at least helps me take tally of what is needed, what WordPress core updates are needed on what websites, which plugins need update on which websites. Manage WP also brings in some active monitoring for security and performance. You can schedule looking at how well your site is performing, whether there's been a significant change in content that is now, there's too many images on this page and now there's negative impact on performance. You can schedule some performance tests that bring you insight with Manage WP. So that side of the slide here, that would be you manage that information and you perform those actions through these services, and they make great tools available. For example, Manage WP will do safe updates. So it will perform an update, it will review your site to ensure that it was not a breaking update, and then it will execute the update. If it identifies an issue, it will automatically roll back. So that is Manage WP. You get to decide when those updates are done. GoWP, WP Buffs, those you're offshoring that responsibility, and they're going to do a great job of actively doing those updates, doing those tests for you, and you can just sit back and relax and enjoy your website. The in-betweens, these would be the iThemes Security, WordFence, Jetpack. There's a few options in between that have services available to do certain elements of the site security and reviews and maintenance for you that are kind of in the middle of the price range. Manage WP, very, very nominal price. You can do backups, security checks with a very nominal price. WP Buffs, GoWP, you're paying more because you're having actual humans go through a process to maintain your site. So here's that spectrum for you to kind of see, and we'll talk more about some of these tools in just a minute. But if you want it done for you, there's ways that you can get it done for you. If you want to be more proactive and do it yourself, you can look at the services over on the left. All right, let's keep going. Another example of companies and services that run the spectrum of doing it for you versus you having to take care of this yourself. We're coming back around to the hosting companies, for example, and this happened not too long ago. That SiteGrounds announced that they would drop WordPress support. Now, this is partially misleading because that does not mean that you can't host a WordPress website on SiteGrounds. What this means is that SiteGrounds had been really cornered into supporting WordPress websites to the extent that they were addressing tickets and issues inside of a WordPress instance. And to be fair to them, that's kind of stepping outside of the scope of a hosting company. A hosting company is your infrastructure. Does your site come up at a good speed? Do you have the storage space to serve a website? Do you have the technical capabilities of supporting WordPress and advanced solutions around a physical bare metal server? That's really the core of their service. It's hosting services. Whereas a lot of the issues that they were just getting cornered into addressing was inside of WordPress. So this is in part not entirely true that they dropped support for WordPress. It's just the tickets and the type of customer service that they provide. Now, the reason I put this slide up is because the spectrum of support for WordPress solutions in the hosting company space does run pretty wide. While it would be an overgeneralization to say that WP Engine addresses all of your tickets inside of WordPress, that's also not fair to say. However, WP Engine, Bluehost, Kinsta, and the like, they will be more supportive of helping you address issues inside of your WordPress instance, shy of coding for you, than other companies would be. So let's say SiteGrounds and others that are really budget companies. They really want to focus on doing a good job of hosting your company as a server. Bluehost, WP Engine, Kinsta, I would put those in the category that's like they are really WordPress specific, and they want to do a good job and help you do a good job of doing WordPress successfully. So that is really important for WordPress maintenance, because there are quite a handful of issues that can be server related. In particular, the very common memory capacity issue. If you have a lot of media assets on your website, it's on cPanel, you may bump into server capacity issues just on memory. So that would be something that you need to talk to your host and say, hey, can you reset my capacity count and let me back into my website? And they may say yes. And by the way, Mervin, you have really 50 duplicates of the same images that are being served on the same page. You should probably go fix that in your WordPress. That is the illustration that I want to bring here. There are companies that will go one layer deeper into your WordPress instance, try to help you troubleshoot, and go that extra mile with the customer service that's WordPress specific than others around the community. Mind you, we love both of these companies. SiteGrounds, they are great active members of the WordPress community. And again, I don't want to just completely negate that they're a WordPress contributor. I just want to explain that there is a spectrum of support from around the community. Depending on what you need, you should look at hosting companies and the type of customer service that they bring carefully for your solutions. Budget-friendly companies, they have a great place and a great value for where they are. But if you need a solution, you need to make sure you're up and running, you have somebody at hand that's familiar with WordPress, then you want to go with one of the companies that does managed WordPress services really, really well and in a dedicated fashion. So that's my point on the hosting support. Let's kind of grow on top of the hosting. So let's talk about performance on top of that. So support varies among hosts. That's the point that I just made, that you have different levels of customer service and how deeply they may go into your WordPress instance to help you troubleshoot things. Managed WordPress hosting is really the best way to secure your instance. You're going to get more tailored support. They're going to be more informed on what's going on inside of WordPress and help you troubleshoot a little better. Site uptime monitoring, this can come in either as just a side service. There's, I think, uptimerobot.com does it for free. You can just set up a monitoring service to ensure that your site is visible at any given time and alert you if it spends 10 minutes unavailable to visitors. There's also optimization and caching. While some hosts do this on their side, if you are doing this yourself, you may use something like a WP Rocket or a W3 Total Cache for doing the offloading or the preloading of certain site assets for caching and optimization. Imagify, Smush, there are services dedicated to optimizing your images, and that's another good way to prevent performance impacting issues from coming around on your website. Email handling, I have to put this talk together. I really have to put this talk together because WordPress out of the box does emails most of the time. Depending on the host, depending on how you install WordPress, it may or may not do emails automatically. So this is something that can have a major impact on your ability to recover your site if WordPress can't even tell you that there's something wrong and give you the link to recover your site after you have a major error. So email handling is kind of a closely related topic, but not exactly here in the maintenance. It's just something good to set it and forget it, but set it correctly. So this is a soon-to-be talk. And there's free and nominal paid services available for this. WooCommerce site functionality checking, regular actual testing, and this is again where the proportions come in. If you have a WordPress WooCommerce website, if you have any amount of dollars coming through that website and you depend on that, You want to make sure that there's nothing preventing your customers from being able to perform a transaction at any time without issues. So testing, whatever your schedule is, every 2 weeks, every time you do an update, you test, you go through the entire checkout process on desktop and on mobile, just the same way a customer would, to view exactly the same experience and identify any issues that need to be addressed. Doing that on a regular basis, or anytime there's changes at the code level for your website, is really important to prevent any negative impact to your revenue. So these are a couple of services that are available, well documented, well supported, community members to perform a variety of areas here. I mentioned Imagify. You have W3 Total Cache, Optimizers, Rocket, Uptime Robot. So I'll be happy to tweet these slides for you, and you can take a look at any of those to meet any of these needs. All right, a really popular topic and a very easy one to check the box. This is probably the easiest one to check the box because there's so many good and free options out there, is backups. And Updraft is one of the ones that does a really great job of this. So this is why I featured it. But there are a number of tools that come with some of the services that I mentioned. Manage WP does backups. WP Buffs and GoWP, they will do backups for you. Your hosting company may do backups of your WordPress website for you. So this is almost a no-brainer. However you want to do backups, you should do them often, provided they don't load down your server. So you want to be doing regular scheduled database and file backups. It has been more than once that I have identified security vulnerabilities because files were being changed on a WordPress instance. So it is the ability to look at past backups and compare and say what document or what file changed from this backup to this backup will surface security issues. It'll surface any malignant script that may be running. So it's really important to keep a handful of these around. I might suggest 30 days worth if you can manage. But files and database backups, there's many tools to do this. And then the other part of the backups is it's great to have them close at hand, meaning you can save them exactly to your WordPress instance, and you'll get a zip file saved right alongside your uploads folder in your own WordPress instance. That's fine, but that should not be your only one, because as mentioned in our first slide, if you have a catastrophic failure of your WordPress instance where something got in there and corrupted all of the files, well, hey, your backups are right next to your uploads folder, so those might be compromised as well. So because backups has become such a commonplace part of maintaining WordPress, and it's available in so many tools, that I highly recommend that you have at least 2 locations of backups. And actually, that's the trivia question that I tweeted over the weekend promoting our talk today. That's my recommendation. You should have at 2 locations of backups at all times if possible. You can have them locally on your WordPress instance right next to your uploads folder, but I highly recommend that you also throw them out into Amazon S3, Google Drive, another FTP server on a different host, or in the case if you use something like Manage WP themselves is keeping your backups on their servers away from where you're hosting your website. So that's my strong recommendation. I feel very safe that if something catastrophic happens to my server, which is where I'm hosting my websites, that I have an off-site backup available. So the ability to schedule these backups, to offload them outside of your WordPress instance, these capabilities come with many of these tools. There's Backup Buddy, Updraft Plus, VaultPress. If you'd like to go with the Jetpack and VaultPress options, those come bundled together, and you can have your WordPress instance backed up in a number of ways. So highly recommend this. There's so many options. This should be just a great peace of mind available to everyone. So that's for backups. So here's a quick view of what Managed WP offers. Really like them. I've been a customer of theirs for a long time. I can tell you their customer support is fantastic. They continue to make improvements to their offerings. You can run scripts, you can run backups, security checks, performance checks, you can run reports. They are outstanding. And you have the ability to notch up or down how frequently you want to perform backups on a certain instance. So very nominally priced. You can run backups very frequently, and this is just another peace of mind available to you to manage your sites. Let's talk about security. This is a whole big category of WordPress. You can do lots and lots to secure your WordPress website, but what we're trying to do here, we're trying to give you the foundations and a good set of options that you can implement for your sites, big and small. So let's talk about this for a few minutes. A good basic piece of security is just keeping your WordPress core themes and plugins up to date. This is one of the core pillars of why we suggest to keep up to date on what changes are happening with your themes, cores, and plugins, because one of the key pieces that developers continue to work on is patching any vulnerabilities that are discovered as they support solutions into the future. So outdated themes, outdated plugins, outdated core, those are the easiest ways for folks to find ways to break into your WordPress website and do bad stuff. Some of the bad stuff that I've seen done on WordPress websites is running spam. So if somebody can get into your WordPress instance, whether you have email set up or not, they can set up a WordPress instance to clandestinely be sending emails and just spamming very aggressively. So keeping your theme, core, and plugins up to date is a great way to secure your instance and be up to the minute. You can do some things like hide my login. You can reposition the WP uploads folder if you so desire. In general, changing your admin username and password to something different than admin and password, that does the trick. iThemes Security and WordFence, they also give you the ability to reposition your login screen and also do limit logins. So if you have brute force attacks are a common issue, that's really what they do. They go onto your login screen /login. They start attempting names and passwords combinations until they hit something that sticks. So both of those plugins, one of their main features is limiting logins, having a list of IP addresses that they block after a certain number of failed attempts. There's a good layer of security right there. WordPress Site Health Check. WordPress at its core, it's bringing more information about security and the health of the instance to you. And one of the things that they just implemented in 5.7 was you can now do HTTPS completely seamlessly. It used to be it still is part of WordFence and iTheme security that you can enable force HTTPS, but now enabling that in WordPress will enable that across your entire WordPress instance, and you don't have to worry about securing your assets references or do a search and replace to do that across your site. And also set, as I mentioned, the WordPress admin email and username and password. Making sure that those are non-standard and configured correctly is another great way to be made aware of any vulnerabilities or security patches that WordPress does on its own. In case you didn't know that, there are ways for WordPress to push really critical security patches updates to the entire internet, but those are rarely done, and those are minor changes just to cover a vulnerability. But versions of WordPress, every version of WordPress includes security patches alongside bug fixes and new features. Just a quick tidbit there. User roles and capabilities. So here again, I'm emphasizing that if you have authors, if you have content managers that do not need the ability to install a plugin or to change the theme of a code of a theme, do not give them those capabilities. So this becomes more important for larger teams. If you have a blog or a nonprofit organization who has authors, who has grants and donations managers, and then you have technical team members that know about themes and plugins. Very, very fair to give the technical professionals their abilities to install and manage themes, and everyone else to not have the ability to break your site by putting in a piece of code that they don't know what it does. So user roles and capabilities really important. Two-factor authentication, another thing that's becoming more and more easy to do. RTCamp, for example, we created and support a Google single sign-on plugin available for everyone. So if you'd like to put Google login into your WordPress website, you can now do that, and that would bring along all of the security of a Google login. So two-factor authentication, multi-layered security for logging into a WordPress instance is becoming more and more easy to do. But at the WordPress level, strong passwords, you can just do that as a standard for your instance. Administrator roles, you can limit that to certain people only. I mentioned limit login attempts. It comes with some of these plugins here on the screen, but you can also implement that just on its own. There's limit login plugins available on the repository for free. Telemetry activity. I really like this one. This is kind of like a receipt paper trail for what's going on your WordPress instance. This plugin, activity log and stream, for example, here referenced on the bottom right. What this plugin will do is it'll just keep a tally. It'll just keep a running receipt, continuously printing documents or saving notes of who does what on your WordPress instance. The administrator turned this plugin on. The administrator turned this page, changed the name of this page. Author 3 updated post number 22. So Stream and other telemetry type of plugins can help you debug issues. If you find, I have used this plugin to identify unintended users being created on a WordPress instance. I have no idea why, and we didn't do the deep dive to identify what the vulnerability was, but we did see through Stream that there were users being created on our WordPress instance that we had no knowledge of and could not identify how those were created. So we rolled back, we looked at what plugins were updated recently, and we took back control of the WordPress instance with backups. But it was Stream and the telemetry information that we had, that receipt being printed continually, that we were able to identify those issues. So highly recommend you looking into implementing those onto your WordPress instance if you have that concern. And then monitoring and notifications plugins. I think this kind of goes back to the uptime robot, keeping an eye on what's happening on your website, making sure that it's available. But if you have actions happening on your website, I have right now one of the big nonprofits that I support, they have a funding program going on. So they want to be notified every time a new submission happens in their Gravity forms. They want to get not an email, they want to get a Slack notification. So, hey, it's working. We see 2 or 3 submissions a day are coming to Slack. Okay, good. Nothing's wrong. There's no issues with the form. It's working successfully. So we see that the instance is healthy. It's doing what it's meant to do. So there you go. Security, notifications, telemetry, keeping an eye on what's going on inside of your instance, reinforcing security with 2FA and other methods, HTTPS, no-brainer. You have a lot of things that you can do right out of the gate here. Cleanup, easy to overlook, and I'll admit the only way I go through this cleanup process is with Managed WP, which makes it quite easy to clean up the database and revisions and such. But nevertheless, taking a little bit of a look under the rug and sweeping more carefully is a good practice, and this is a performance, it's a security thing, everything together here. Managing your comments, managing your spam, that is, you can take a look at plugins that can help you clean that stuff up. The database and revisions is something that, for example, Manage WP can do. I think some of the caching plugins do have the capability as well to do like revisions and database cleanup. But there are some orphaned information, for example, that can just linger and be available and have to be parsed through to deliver a performant front-end experience. So going through your media library, going through your plugins and users list, just taking a regular look at those, who's outdated on the users list, who doesn't need to even be here at all. Redundant plugins. What plugins are just sitting around? I'm sure many of us have Contact Form 7 when we have moved on and we're now using Ninja Forms or we're using Gravity Forms. Okay, what's Contact Form 7 doing there besides, if we haven't updated it, it's being a vulnerability. Somebody that is looking to go through Contact Form 7 into our WordPress instance and it's outdated, that can happen. So get rid of those files. Media library, again, there's optimization plugins that do a fantastic job of going through, optimizing, deduplicating, and serving up media assets really, really well. So among those, Imagify and Smush are, I think, among the two most popular. Content cleanup, I didn't put it on the slide here, but Yoast SEO, premium Yoast SEO can help you redirect traffic. So if you get rid of posts or if you get rid of pages because they're redundant or you don't need that traffic, you don't need that content to be serving traffic anymore, you can use Yoast SEO Premium and others to redirect based on content that you get rid of. So content cleanup is also something to do alongside regular plugins and instance cleanup. So what are those 3 layers that I promised you? So I've taken you through all of these major elements of upkeep and maintaining a good WordPress instance. And I mentioned you can do those either at a high level or you can go really, really deep and do them really systematically, really carefully, and really think on doing them in a proactive way. So here is where I've kind of broken down what are these 3 layers of WordPress site maintenance. And we start with the good foundation. As I mentioned, keeping things up to date, being on a good host, and just being savvy about resolving site health issues and not having redundant plugins sitting around. That's a good foundation. You're in good footing. Your website works. It's up and available, and you're able to work with it into the future. That's fair. Let's call that layer 1. Layer 2 is where you're doing some active monitoring, you're doing some patching, and you're doing more hands-on either yourself or you're starting to offload pieces of this maintaining and upkeep of your website. You're doing the regular updates. You may be doing some of the user management and assigning of capabilities. You're doing your backups. You're doing your uptime monitoring with Uptime Robot or Manage WP. And then layer 3 is where you're really being proactive. You're doing reinforcement. You're doing scheduled and regular testing. And you're really taking a real control of your instance, making sure that it's available, performant for scaling and doing well for your customers into the future. Here's where we're bringing in the 2FA. Here's where we're bringing in the customized user roles, capabilities, really limiting who can do what in the instance. You're doing scheduled security, performance, and functionality testing. You may be doing a development and deployment workflow. So now you're reinforcing your WordPress core files. You're not letting people install plugins. You are manually, code-wise, deploying new versions of your site with a deployment workflow. So this is really the proactive approach. This is where some of these e-commerce solutions, if you have any kind of a publication, here's where you're really doing a hands-on approach. You're maintaining your instance actively. You're not letting things move around that you do not know about. So that's layer 3. But starting with good foundations, being aware of what WordPress needs, what to keep an eye on, and some proactive activity, keeping your instance up to date, backed up, and doing security checks, will do just fine for most people. But this is kind of the TLDR slide of the 3 layers, and how deep you want to go into any of these areas is really up to you and the proportions of what you need for your solution. And there's lots to learn and ongoing maintenance for WordPress. Let's take a step aside from WordPress for just a minute, because we don't work in a vacuum. We often don't work by ourselves. We don't work with just one client. So I also wanted to acknowledge that, hey, WordPress is just part of what we do. It's the main tool that delivers the business value or the logic or the store management for us and our customers. But we actually work with information, communications, passwords, alongside everything that we're doing inside of WordPress and code and hosting and what have you. So I wanted to bring into the good maintenance practices is good digital citizenship practices, is good business practices that you should be doing alongside of maintaining and backups. I highly encourage you to have good processes alongside your business and whatever you do with WordPress. And that begins and ends with documenting everything that you're doing. If you want to put in place a new feature and your client asks you, hey, how do I put in a new form, or how do I put in a new landing page and bring in YouTube references? Okay, well, you're going to create a page template, either with Gutenberg, with Elementor, with Divi. You're going to create a new page template, and you're either going to paste in a YouTube embed reference, or you're probably going to install a WordPress YouTube feed plugin in order to render multiple videos on that page. Okay, that's all great. If your client's asking you for it and you're going to do it, document it. Hey, here's option 1, copy and paste the YouTube URL. Option 2, if you want the feed, hey, there's these 3 plugins that can do the feed on the page, and it's a shortcode to embed it. So documenting what you're doing on your WordPress instance, and especially if you're handing this off to a customer, it's really good to write stuff down in a safe and secure place. So using Dropbox, using Google Drive for your working documents, really, really good practice. And it's if you have any amount of clients, it's a nominal fee to have one single place where all of your working documents live, and you can share them with your customers on a as-needed basis. Development workflows. This is kind of a developer practice, but I know that many people kind of grow into that eventually because they're doing customizations on themes and plugins in the future. So learning Git, learning SVN, learning local by flywheel, it's going to help you. It's going to help you stop testing in production and at least breaking things in a sandbox, in a very tight sandbox on your workstation. So learning development workflows, staging, production, local by flywheel, or the like will help you in your practices not break production. Workstation backups, here again, I'm hark back to Dropbox, Google Drive, OneDrive. Nowadays, these services are so commonplace, and they all do almost the same thing that it's very easy to implement constant backups of your information on your workstation up in a cloud. Workstation antivirus, I personally like Bitdefender. I think it's among the less cumbersome to use, but highly recommend that you have something looking at your web security locally on your workstation and trying to mitigate against common threats and spamware and things that come into your workstation. Password vaults. Mr. Steve and I have an ongoing discussion as to I'm soon to transition to 1Password because of 2FA, maybe. I don't know. But I am a very big advocate for password vaults. I'm presently on LastPass. And I do have it. For both purposes, for both personal and business purposes, and it's great. I don't remember any passwords except the one that is quite obscure and very secure for the purposes of a master password. Cloud-based emails. Nowadays, I can't think of anyone that's still using POP3 mail, but Google Suite, Google Workspace, Office 365. both have options at the $5 to $10 range today. So if you are managing more than one website, if you're working with projects and you would like to establish yourself with a professional communications presence, it is so easy to do nowadays with these nominal services. And you have a paper trail, you have your own branded email with your domain. So this all harkens back to that documentation and having your files in your very own private silo available for you and your customers. So communication, security practices, here again, really good things to keep in mind as you're working with WordPress and maintaining sites for you and your customers. So there you have it. We've covered a lot of information about WordPress, security, uptime, monitoring, telemetry, and I'm very happy to talk to you about any and all of these services. As I mentioned, there's not a single referral link on my presentation. I've all sincere experiences with many of the tools that I've mentioned to you, and also they're all great WordPress community members. So I know that you'll have a good experience with all of them. So happy to answer any broad or unique questions. I'll do my best to work my way around and give you good direction. And I thank everyone for your time. I hope that you enjoyed the talk and that it was helpful. And a very big thank you to Microsoft and Kinsta, our community meetup sponsors. We certainly hope to be back at the Microsoft Learning Center in that swanky office very, very soon, once again in person. But stay safe, everyone, and thanks for joining us today.
Mervin, that was a great job and really detailed. Thanks. I learned a lot. I have a couple questions for you. Suzanne was asking, how do you feel about managed hosting with auto backup like Flywheel?
I think that's really, really good. And if it comes with your plan, I would absolutely go for it. That's something that's being more and more added to just the standard practices for many hosting companies. And that's great because it's available at your hosting company. I'm sure that it'll be very quick to restore if something happens. And if it's a nominal fee, it is a great peace of mind right there from the same people that are hosting your website. And I would absolutely trust that. So do it.
Great. All right. Padma is asking, what's the difference between a backup from a hosting company and a backup from a plugin like Updraft?
Sure. I would say those backups will differ very little. Some hosting companies give that backup a certain flavor because it's happening perhaps at the server level, at a very high server level at the hosting company. But in general, a WordPress backup, a good WordPress backup of the files and database is going to look very, very similar whether you do it at your hosting company or whether you have it extracted and done outside of your WordPress instance. And the reason for that is because a WordPress instance, whether it lives on AWS or it lives on GoDaddy, it's comprised of a set of files on PHP and a Microsoft SQL database. That's it. So whether it's done on your hosting company or whether it's done outside, it's still going to look like a bunch of files and a SQL database. So there's not a lot of difference. There may be a difference in you're trying to restore. If you're trying to restore from your hosting company backups, you must go through the hosting company to kind of recover that and put it back into service. If you're doing it from outside, you can use Updraft or whatever you use to perform that backup off-site. But in general, those backups will be nearly identical.
Great. Okay. Your point on documentation brought up a couple of questions from Jocelyn and Suzanne. So Jocelyn asked if you ever used a piece of software called Tetra for documentation, and Suzanne is just asking in general, what apps do you know of and recommend for teams to document?
Awesome. I have not used Tetra myself. I use a combination of software depending on the project. So RTCamp, big projects, we use Jira, we use Active Collab, we use, what else? I think Jira and Active Collab are the big ones that we use. For smaller scale projects with medium-sized teams of collaborators, I use Trello a lot. Personally, I'm using Trello and Team Gantt. That way I get to kind of put in place, this happens first, then this happens, then this happens. Team Gantt is really good at visualizing that. And Trello, or any kind of a Kanban view, hey, these things are working, these are inbox, these need to be assessed and queued, and these are completed. So there's different views for documenting. Honestly, if you need to just start out, I have clients that are just using a Word doc. I just put an outline. Hey, this is the design pieces that we need to work on. This is the development, CMS customizations that we need to work on. Whatever documentation fits the need as you're working with other collaborators. Technical professionals love Jira. They want tickets. They want sprints and epics. Whereas my nonprofit clients, hey, give us a Trello board plus or minus a Word doc is plenty for us. I'm going to look at Tetra, though. I'd be interested to take a look at new stuff and see what's coming around the corner.
Cool. What about the actual to hand off documentation to a client or a support? I mean, Stan's also asking about a support ticket log. I guess that's right, Jira. But what about handing documentation to a client?
For documentation for a client, in general, I like Google Docs. A nice formatted H1, H2, H3 paragraphs, screenshots doc. Something very low key that can be flattened into a PDF. It doesn't require any kind of a Git docs. It doesn't require any kind of a page builder or anything. If it's a doc, make it a doc. Make it a PDF that somebody can print and have as a reference. A really strong recommendation there. You mentioned one other thing. What was it?
For a support ticket for a support ticket log.
I use Zen right now. I use Zendesk both for Wingman WP and well, at RT Camp we use Active Collab because we don't deal with tickets as much as we do with tasks. So whenever we're managing development, like a roadmap for a client, we really like Active Collab because you can have comments, you can have threads, you can have assignments, you can log time. So it's kind of a project management tool, a communication tool, and also a time management log tool. For tickets, like true tickets, honestly, Zendesk, that's what it does. That's their bread and butter, or tools like it that do similar functionality to Zendesk for types of tickets like that.
Great. All right, let's see what we got here. Lothar is asking, what tools are there to maintain a staging production workflow? Outside of for hosting companies that do that, but outside that, I guess.
There are many. As you get into development, as you get into true development, you'll see that there are staging, testing, and deployment workflows that can get really, really advanced. However, to clone your instance, the couple of common ways that I know of, let me give you a couple of options. There is the cloning onto a local development environment. So you can export your site out of the cloud hosting where it sits, and you can import it into local by Flywheel to run on your physical workstation, tweak it, break it, do whatever you need. There are similar alternatives to staging your environment either at a hosting company or at another host or at another hosting account. So with Updraft, with Managed WP, with Backup Buddy, you can duplicate a WordPress instance and put it on another separate hosting environment. What I personally do is I maintain an identical server up in the cloud just for development and another one for production. So they're both DigitalOcean droplets. And I'm developing in the cloud in an identical setup as is going to be in production. So for me, my development workflow is work in the cloud in a development environment, code, test, debug, give the customer the full experience on a separate domain, and then when we're ready to go live, I just move it from this droplet to this droplet, which has the exact same caching, WordPress, SQL configuration. There's no difference at all. I don't have to worry about, local by Flywheel, it works, but then when I push it up to production, it doesn't work. So for me, I have two identical, very economical DigitalOcean droplets where I have a staging and a production environment. That's a big can of worms, though. I could go on and on about the different deployment workflows. There's DeployBot, there's Jenkins. You can really get me going on there.
I mean, this may be another presentation you want to give in the future.
I think so.
Jocelyn's asking, is there a good way to manage clients on different hosts? And I'm not clear on how she means that, but do you have any ideas?
Well, ManageWP, for example, is host agnostic. You just connect ManageWP to a WordPress instance. It almost doesn't matter where it's hosted. So ManageWP does do that regardless of what host it is on. Several other tools like Updraft for backups is running on your WordPress instance, and you can throw that backup out onto a different cloud altogether. So that one is not dependent on any host, and likewise the place where you throw that backup into is not dependent on any host. VaultPress, Jetpack, likewise, you install those into the WordPress instance. They're going to take backups and analytics and save those elsewhere. So it's only at the hosting company level that you might encounter, yes, this is a Bluehost backup, or yes, this is a Bluehost troubleshooting tool, or this is the GoDaddy backup, this is the GoDaddy troubleshooting tool. In general, these tools that you install into a WordPress instance, they are available in all instances of WordPress, regardless of where they're hosted. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, actually, immediately she wrote us exactly what I was looking for. So that was great.